Imagine waking up in 2026 and realizing the collapse didn't happen overnight. It started in 1913. The moment a quiet decision rewired every dollar you've ever touched. For over a century, the value in your pocket has been dissolving in slow motion, like a fuse burning under the floorboards. And now that fuse is inches from the powder, this isn't about fear. It's about seeing the pattern they hoped you'd ignore. Because once you understand how the endgame was engineered, you'll never look at money, power, or the future the same way again. To understand 2026, you have to travel back to a moment most Americans have forgotten: the birth of the Federal Reserve in 1913. It was sold as a stabilizer, a guardian of the economy, a silent protector that would manage crises and preserve the dollar's strength. But what if the real effect was the opposite? What if 1913 wasn't a beginning, but the first crack in a system designed to slowly drain the value of every paycheck, every savings account, every lifetime of hard work? Before 1913, a dollar was simple. A dollar meant gold. Not an idea, not a promise, not an I owe you real value. But when the Federal Reserve was created, the link between money and reality started to fade. The new system allowed something previous generations would have considered unthinkable: the ability to create money out of nothing. And whenever a government gains the power to print value instead of earn it, collapse stops being a question of if and becomes only a question of when. Over the next century, that quiet shift turned into a tidal wave. The dollar didn't collapse suddenly. It eroded slowly, year by year, crisis by crisis. In 1933, the government confiscated gold. In 1944, the world tied its currencies to the dollar instead of gold. In 1971, the last link to real value was severed overnight. And after that, money became something new, something unanchored, something that could be expanded infinitely with no ceiling except political convenience. And every time the money supply grows faster than the real economy, one thing happens: your dollar buys less. Not because of bad luck, not because prices magically rise, but because the system must extract value from the present to pay for mistakes in the past. Inflation isn't an accident, it's the design. The fuse kept burning through wars, recessions, bubbles, and booms. The system survived by shifting the cost forward, onto future generations, future workers, future taxpayers, onto you. By the time we reached the 2008 financial crisis, the dollar was already a shadow of its former self. The response: print more, stimulate more, inflate more. It bought time, but at a cost nobody wanted to confront. Then came 2020, lockdown, shutdown, and the largest money creation event in modern history. More dollars were printed in a few months than in decades combined. And that's when the fuse stopped being slow. It started racing. Because once you flood a system with trillions of new dollars, but the real world doesn't grow at the same speed, something has to give. That something is confidence. The belief that a piece of paper or a number on a screen actually holds value. This is why 2026 isn't a surprise. It's a destination. The end of a timeline that began in 1913. We were told the system was stable. We were told inflation was temporary. We were told everything was under control. But history shows that every currency in human civilization follows the same arc: creation, expansion, corruption, collapse. And the dollar, once the most powerful currency ever created, is now approaching the final stage, not through chaos, but through simple math. And here's the truth nobody wants to admit: the real collapse is always invisible at first. People don't wake up to burning banks. They wake up to rising prices, shrinking savings, and the feeling that no matter how hard they work, they're falling behind. That's the beginning. That's where collapse actually starts. And that's exactly where we are. Before I continue and reveal what the endgame of 2026 truly looks like, please consider liking this video and subscribing. It helps the channel reach more people who need to understand what's coming. If the first block explained how we got here, this part reveals what happens next. Because the collapse of a currency isn't a single event, it's a sequence, a pattern. And once that pattern enters its final phase, there is no reversing it. The first sign is inflation. Not the kind they talk about on television. The real kind, the one you feel before you can measure it. The kind that shows up in groceries, rent, healthcare, used cars, tuition, and ironically, in the shrinking size of everything you buy. Inflation is not just rising numbers. Inflation is the slow erasure of your past. The second sign is debt. Not personal debt, national debt. Trillions on top of trillions, stacked like unstable bricks. At some point, the debt becomes larger than the economy itself. And once that happens, the system has only two options: shrink painfully or inflate the debt away. Guess which one governments always choose? The third sign is denial. Leaders claiming everything is fine. Experts insisting the system is strong. News outlets repeating the same phrases: temporary, manageable, under control. But history shows that denial is the final stage before the break. And then comes the moment that defines 2026, the point where confidence snaps. Confidence is everything. A currency doesn't survive because it has value. It survives because people believe it has value. The moment that belief weakens, even slightly, the system begins to unwind. Investors move first. Foreign nations move next. And ordinary citizens, the last to know, wake up to a world where their money doesn't stretch the way it used to. This is when people start asking dangerous questions. Why does everything cost more? Where did my savings go? Why is my rent 20% higher? Why does food feel like a luxury? The answers lead to one conclusion: the dollar is losing trust. When a world reserve currency begins to lose trust, the impact is global. Nations diversify into other assets. Investors flee to safety. Debt becomes harder to refinance. And the cost of living skyrockets because the dollar's purchasing power evaporates. This is the silent collapse. The collapse that doesn't look like Hollywood. The collapse that looks like people working harder and earning less. The collapse that looks like two jobs instead of one. The collapse that looks like your money evaporating faster each year. This is the collapse we're entering. So what is the end game? The end game is consolidation. Control. Reset. When a currency loses too much value, the system that supports it must evolve or collapse entirely. Historically, governments respond with the same set of tools: stricter regulations, new forms of digital control, and eventually, the introduction of a new monetary model. Some call it a reset, others call it a digital transition. But whatever label you prefer, the meaning is the same. The old system is dying, and a replacement is being prepared. 2026 won't be the end. It will be the turning point. The moment the world realizes the dollar is no longer invincible. The story that started in 1913 won't end with fire and chaos. It will end the way most collapses do: quietly, mathematically, inevitably. But understanding this gives you something most people don't have: time. Time to adapt, time to think clearly, and time to position yourself before the shift becomes undeniable. If this message reached you, then you're already ahead. And if you want more videos that break these events down clearly and without fear-mongering, consider subscribing and liking this video so it reaches more people who need this information.